Imagine buying 2 properties only to realize that in buying those properties, you missed out on over $200,000 in capital growth. Well, that's exactly what happened to this poor lady. She bought 2 brand new properties that have barely moved in value. And the real sting was seeing what she could have made by buying elsewhere. That loss in momentum set her plans back years. That's why she came to us for help with her 3rd investment property. But unfortunately, I see this a lot. Investors think they're buying good properties only to realize a few years in, they're stuck with a lemon of a property that's going nowhere. So today, I'm going to walk you through the 3 types of properties we're actively avoiding this year and how you can spot those property traps so you can invest with confidence. Before we get into the worst properties that you'll want to avoid this year, there's something important we need to address. And it's unfortunately what most people get wrong when it comes to investing in property. You see, a lot of people assume that capital growth comes from like government spending, new developments, or major building activity. And they buy into this growth corridor hype and they forget you're going to get the real growth from buyer competition, not an increase in construction. You see, capital growth ultimately comes from there being more demand from owner-occupiers than the number of properties available for sale and the number of properties being built. It's actually that simple. Now, of course, there are certain things that can increase demand, like in a suburb level, it could be stronger jobs growth, it could be good schools, it could be new amenities that could attract young families. On an economic basis, it could be falling interest rates. But whatever the case happens to be, you are looking to buy in areas where there's more demand from people who want to buy and live in an area. On the flip side, if most buyers are investors, it's like an investment hotspot, or the suburb is being flooded with new properties to be built, which, mind you, is happening in multiple suburbs around the country. And note, I didn't say cities, I said suburbs, because you need to look at the data on a suburb by suburb basis. And there are definitely certain suburbs where governments are trying to increase supply quite dramatically. It's one reason why you can't just say, hey, is this city a good place to invest in versus that? No, you need to look at the data on a suburb by suburb basis. And if you see that in a particular suburb, most people buying are either investors or there's a real increase in supply, then the chances are the capital growth that you're looking to achieve, you're going to fail in that area. So with that said, here are the 3 types of properties we've seen consistently underperform, especially in this type of economic environment. I spoke to someone recently who said that she lost $97,000 on an investment property. Now, when I asked her what happened, she said she had bought an apartment in Sydney for $970,000. It was off the plan. She put in her 10% deposit, which was $97,000, and she was sold the dream. She was told you don't have to worry about financing. You can wait until the property is built, and then for sure the property is going to be worth more than you paid for it. So getting a loan will be very, very easy. She was told there's lots and lots of development happening here. It's a real hotspot. You need to buy now. The reality, though, was very, very different. When the apartment was built, she went to try and get the bank loan. The bank valued her apartment at less than what she'd paid for it, which meant she had overpaid on the apartment. The bank actually said the apartment was worth $120,000 less than her purchase price. With no other option, she went to the developer to say, hey, what could happen? The developer said, sorry, your 10% deposit is non-refundable. So you've only got 2 options. You either come up with the extra funds between what the bank valued the property and her purchase price, or you have to walk away and give up your $97,000. This poor lady had no way of getting the extra funds, so she walked away and lost her $97,000 like that, overnight. Imagine how scary that would feel. You see, this is one of many reasons I avoid off-the-plan apartments like the plague. You just don't know what the future holds. What if you buy a property when interest rates are low? By the time your apartment is built, interest rates are higher, and maybe now you don't have the borrowing capacity anymore to buy the apartment at the price that you agreed to. Or, like in this poor lady's case, there is so much supply on the market, so many apartments being built, banks start to get scared that thinking that the prices are likely to fall, and they undervalue the property or value it for less than you paid for the property, and now you've got to come up with over $100,000 like this lady did, or walk away from your 5 or 10% deposit, losing your hard-earned money overnight. Now, these types of developments are typically very investor heavy. They're sold to investors. And remember what I said earlier on, capital growth comes from buying properties that are in high demand from owner-occupiers, not mainly investors. Capital growth also comes from buying properties where there's more demand than supply. But if you buy something that's off the plan, essentially you're buying a type of property in an area where they're increasing supply quite dramatically. It's not as if they just build one apartment, right? An off the plan apartment is normally in a big tower, potentially hundreds of apartments in that tower, potentially multiple towers. So you've got all this supply coming onto the market at the same time. That, of course, will have a massive negative impact on your capital growth. But worse, as an investor, your biggest concern almost certainly is going to be, can you get your property rented out quickly? Now, if there's lots of apartments being built, they're all coming onto the market at the same time, there's this excess glut of apartments, are you going to get it rented out quickly? The odds are you're going to struggle because there's so much supply. Tenants can choose what they want to rent, and they're either going to negotiate down so you'll get less rent than you've expected, or your apartment could just sit there vacant for quite a while, because remember, most of these off-the-plan apartments are bought by investors. So you're competing with all the other investors out there to try and get a tenant. That is not what you want. So before you buy an investment property, ask yourself this question. Is the type of property you're looking to buy something that owner-occupiers would really want in the suburb that you're targeting? Or are you buying something that's just being pitched to investors and potentially overpriced? And just before I move on to the next property type you should avoid, if you're serious about buying an investment property this year and you don't want to make an expensive mistake, I've put together a simple yet powerful checklist. 10 things you need to check before you buy an investment property, and you can get it totally for free by clicking on the link in the description. This checklist will help you spot red flags and avoid mistakes like what I'm going through here. So check out the link in the description and grab that checklist while you still can. Now, I have no issue if you are looking to buy in an area where, because of affordability reasons, or maybe because in that particular suburb, that's what owner-occupiers want. They want townhouses. Then buying something like that makes a lot of sense. But buying something off the plan has very similar risks to buying an off-the-plan apartment. Again, these are going to be in estates, so you don't know who all the other buyers are. I have literally seen a group of townhouses all being sold to investors, and investors only because the developers feel they can make more money. All power to them, but that's not what you want. You really want to avoid off-the-plan townhouses because you're buying something off a piece of paper, hence it's off the plan. You actually haven't seen it. And although many people think, oh, if I buy a new property, that's going to be better, if you've sort of been just looking in the media for the last 12 to 18 months, you would have seen multiple times where so-called new properties are built very, very poorly, very poor quality of construction, and the properties are riddled with issues, but the poor buyer now has to deal with them because when you buy something that's off the plan, you enter what's known as an unconditional contract, which means that you have to move ahead with the property at the end, even if you don't like what you see. And a big part of the reason why these contracts are unconditional for unknowing buyers is because the developer needs to do what's known as a number of pre-sales. So they need to have sold a number of townhouses off the plan and then be able to show those unconditional sales to the bank in order to get financing for their projects. And again, if these are all sold to investors, you are now competing with all those investors for the same tenants. And from a capital growth perspective, an owner-occupier isn't necessarily going to want to live in a pocket of townhouses where they realize that everyone else are tenants. That's just not going to be what's highly desirable for them. With off-the-plan townhouses, you're paying a premium to compensate the developer for their costs and their profits. That's not what you want. You want to get a property at market value. You don't want to pay a premium for a property. If anything, you want to get a property for less than market value. So avoid off-the-plan townhouses. Instead, focused on townhouses that are established in areas where owner-occupiers want those types of townhouses. Preferably, if you can, look at locations where these townhouses are close to schools and all the amenities. Essentially, do your due diligence, but make sure you can see what you're buying. You're not buying something that's off the plan. I see this a mistake made so often. People think, oh, I should be buying land. I don't want to buy apartments, so I'll buy a house and land package somewhere that's way out from the city. But the problem with that is, well, again, you are buying a property type where they're increasing supply. Like, for example, if you just look at a map and look at the west of Melbourne, there's land pretty much from Melton in the west all the way to Adelaide. So much land available. And so the Victorian government, if they need to increase supply, can just rezone that land and keep building. I mean, even suburbs in Melbourne like Werribee or Melton, they didn't even exist, say, 15 years ago. These were new suburbs opened up to increase supply to address the housing crisis. Now, I don't have a problem with the government trying to do something to address the housing crisis. That's fine. But as an investor, that's not what you want to be buying. You want to avoid those house and land packages that are way out of the city. They're not close to any amenities. There's lots of land available, which will again compromise on your capital growth. But the other thing that most people forget is tenants aren't going to want to live out there. There's nothing out there for them. Tenants want to be close to amenities. So you end up paying a premium for a property because, again, whenever you buy something brand new, especially since the COVID pandemic and when construction costs have gone through the roof and they're continuing to rise, you're paying a huge premium on the property. So you're paying above market value. So now if the market value is here and you've paid a premium for the property, you've got to wait for the market to get to the price that you paid and then rise before you see any capital growth. That could easily be 2-3 years. I remember a client of mine who came to me after they'd sold a property they bought as a house and land package. They said they paid $750,000 for this house and land package. Yes, it was a few years ago, but 3 years later, they sold it for $700,000 because the market hadn't risen yet fast enough. So they sold a property 3 years after they bought it for $50,000 less than they paid for it. Meanwhile, had they taken that same money and bought an established property in a different area, they probably would have made an extra $150,000. So the $150,000 missed opportunity plus the $50,000 loss on the property they bought, they were behind $200,000 and 3 years with their investing plans. So don't look at these house and land packages out in the middle of nowhere. I know people will say, oh, but it's got great tax benefits and great depreciation. Well, let me ask you this. What are you investing for? Are you investing to build wealth for your future and for your family? So that means you want to buy properties that are going to rise in value? Or are you buying properties to actually make a loss on potentially, at least because you're buying in areas which may not grow for quite some time, or you're paying such a premium that your capital growth will be compromised just to get some tax benefits? Which way would you rather go? For me, I'm a believer that if you're investing in property, you're doing it for wealth creation primarily. The tax advantages, that's just a bit of cream on top. It helps you with your holding costs for the property, and that's it. Your aim, though, is wealth creation. So focus on established properties in areas where there's not much increase in supply. They're essentially landlocked. There's more demand from owner-occupiers. More people want to live in that area than the available number of properties for sale, where you've got already all the good infrastructure, there's jobs growth, everything that a young family would look for if they're trying to move to live in a particular area. When you focus on that, you are then more likely to achieve the capital growth and the wealth results that you're after. So now you know which types of properties to avoid. But what about areas, right? Because you can't just buy an established property anywhere. You may not see the capital growth that you're after. There are certain areas you want to avoid for a number of reasons. So if you want to know the 10 areas I personally would avoid this year, check out this next video where I go through that in detail.